So let's just look at these real quick. Here's two trades, two opening gaps that were on the radar this morning, PTCT and FLS. And the one that I took was PTCT because it was a picture-perfect setup, and the one I passed on was FLS because it was less than perfect, even though it wound up being sort of the better moneymaker for the morning. So let's look at PTCT first, and just what made this one, I think, a good setup. So if you look at the first bar with a giant first bar, it had the gap, and then it just kept plowing higher. So from a 46.40 low up into a 48.40 high. So that's a real significant first bar move. And what you like to see is that after a move like that, you get a second bar that looks like this one, where it's having a hard time pushing through the high of the first bar. Just get a drawing tool here so you guys can see this a little better. See how this bar is coming up, and it keeps retesting this. So my guess is some of you might even go and get an advanced entry on this and get a better profit objective. So you'd be in somewhere around 48.60 with a target at 47.51. And then it's sort of a whole different setup, whole different trade there. It looks a lot better, at least on paper. But if you take an advanced entry, you've got to be ready for a like 48.80, 48.85 stop. And sometimes it's just hard to take those quick stops. That is where Rick Kipp shines. He likes to get in. He's not afraid to he'll take 4 or 5 stop outs, and if they're 10 cents a piece, he doesn't care. On something that's $47, he can do that because 10, 15 cents is actually going to be a pretty significant move on the spread. But the textbook setup here was from 47.99. You have this nice 1, 2, 3 kind of a setup, and then down into this opening tick. So the reason I targeted that 47.51 was that's where the stock took off from in the morning. So everything that happened after the opening bell happened right from that 47.51 level. It took a dive, but if that's what you're hoping for, you need to look over here. And when you see that there's nothing happening here, the cluster analysis is coming up and saying there was no significant volume that occurred below that open. There's nothing significant in terms of what happened next below that opening. Everything really important was up in here. So it makes sense to target the opening tick. So frequently we target an opening tick on a bar. So this one was just a real logical setup. 1, 2, 3. It's not 3 bars, it's just a second bar entry. That one made sense to me. Julie liked Flowserve, and that's really a good trader. We like the stock. It's just when you're not able to watch something tick by tick by tick, when you've got a bunch of setups the way that you do, you really have to go back and just go to the textbook entries and say, what's going on in these bars? And this bar and this bar, if you're thinking of your around the horn stuff, that's pretty much a double header setup. If you get down a little bit lower in the second bar, then 57.85 is definitely where you're looking and saying, this is going to make a double header move lower. Where would my target be? The problem with it is when you've got this much range on a bar, you tend to get bleed back, especially when your trigger bar is starting all the way up here at 58.50. So you have a 58.50 move lower, then you're deciding, am I getting it at 58 and taking a chance that it's going to bounce at 57.85, or do I just wait for 57.85 in the second bar? So I would have waited for that 57.85 level to violate. And then my calculus is, where do I have to set a stop? My stop is going to have to be up in here. So it would be up above this volume by price. That gives me about a 58.85 stop. So it's about $1 stop. And it comes down to what do you think the probability is you're going to get back up in there. And when there's these big second bars, what we see a lot is that the wiggle gets you way back up into the range. It's going to retest that stuff a couple times. If it went, right, if it was going to go, your profit objective, $57.10. So this is where, to me, it just sort of unwinds. So I've got a 70-cent profit target, and I've got $1 something potential stop out. And in my experience anyways, that potential stop out has a pretty high probability of getting retested based on that second bar. So that's why I didn't take it. So I know I'm going to get questions about what made that a bad trade or what made that a trade you weren't looking at. Mike Ball asks those questions a lot. That's a great question. I like filter questions. I think that's a real good way to look at the market. What made you decide to not take that one is probably more important than what made you decide to take something. But that's the logic behind those two setups this morning, and that's why I took PTCT and passed on FLS.